Welcome to episode 19 of the Rescued by Dragons podcast, Tales of the Brunch Club, a fantasy fiction podcast inspired by a weekly homebrew Dungeons & Dragons campaign. My name is Dominic White, and I invite you to picture yourself in a cozy, torchlit tavern, ale in hand, gathered around a table with other listeners, waiting to hear the next chapter in the tale of the Brunch Club. But first, a quick recap of our previous episode. In episode 18, during Drusilla's night watch, she heard a twig snap nearby. She saw a silver-eyed dwarf watching their camp from the bushes across the road. Drusilla invited her to sit with them. Her name was Diesa, and she said she was seeking her fortune to help her family get out of poverty. She also had a difficult-to-read map to a hidden treasure, and told them if they helped her find it, she'd split it with them. Elora was able to follow the map to an abandoned mineshaft. They lost control of the tricky hand-crank elevator platform and plunged the last 20 feet down the shaft. With only minor injuries, they continued into the mine. Vorjon and Diesa each set a trap off, but were able to avoid harm. They found the treasure chest at the back of a large cavern next to a small pool of black liquid. It was surrounded by weapons and empty armor. They stood at the entrance to the cavern and plotted their next move. And now, Episode 19, The Serpent King. The Brunch Club stared at the ownerless weapons and armor that lay between them and the treasure chest. Salas suggested, "Let's not end up like these guys." Drusilla said, "Can we assume that whatever killed these poor bastards came from that pool?" They all nodded in agreement. Diesa looked around the cavern. "I'll sneak around the edge and get to it. You guys can cover me." "Wait," said Vorjon as Diesa took her first step. "You have bow. You can help cover. Chest may be booby-trapped. Why don't I go, carry it back here, then you can open it. If something goes wrong, we'll be here to assist you." "Well, aren't you the noble one?" Diesa mocked. "He's right," said Elora. "It makes the most sense." Diesa stepped back and took her bow off her shoulder, knocked an arrow on the string, and pointed it at the dark pool. Elora did the same. Drusilla said a prayer conjuring her mystical raven. It flew to the pool and hovered between it and the treasure box. Salas got ready to unleash as many magic missiles as she could if the liquid in the pool so much as rippled. Vorjon walked slowly around the cavern, staying close to the stone walls. Drusilla's dancing light guided his way. He walked as quietly as he could, but occasionally his heavy boot would crush a small rock, or his shield would clank against his mace. Diesa whispered, "That oath is going to get us killed." Salas came to the defense of their paladin. "That oath will probably save your life at some point." "Both of you shut up," urged Elora. Vorjon reached the strongbox. He paused for a few seconds, staring into the pool. Its surface remained perfectly smooth and undisturbed. He lifted the strongbox easily. It felt lighter than he thought it should, but he'd never carried a box of treasure before, so he had no basis for comparison. Drusilla's spiritual raven stayed between him and the pool as he carried the box back to them. They let Vorjon pass and walk a few yards into the tunnel. They backed towards him, keeping their eyes and weapons trained on the dark water. When they went around a bend in the tunnel and could no longer see the cavern, they relaxed a little. Vorjon put the box down and stepped away. "All yours," he said to Diesa. Elora kept her bow ready and looked back toward the cavern, keeping watch. Drusilla kept an eye on the other end of the tunnel. Diesa dropped to one knee, took a small roll of cloth out of one of her pockets, and laid it on the ground. She unrolled it, exposing an array of delicate lock-picking tools. "You're a thief," Vorjon said, the contempt obvious in his voice. "I prefer the term rogue," she replied. She inserted one lockpick into a keyhole and jiggled it up and down, getting a feeling for the lock's inner workings. She placed a second pick in the lock below the first pick and pulled them up and down in opposite directions. They all heard the loud click of the lid unlocking. Diesa turned back at the paladin and smiled. A damn good rogue at that. She opened the lid and a single large dart shot from the opening and embedded itself in her shoulder. "Damn it," she said through gritted teeth. She fell back into a sitting position. Her thoughts became cloudy, and her stomach felt nauseous. Pain began to well up in her extremities. "That dart's fresh," she said weakly. Vorjon stepped forward, removed the dart, and placed a hand over the wound. He said a prayer. When he finished, Diesa felt her head clear and the pain and nausea subside. "Told you he'd save your life," Salas said, and smirked at Diesa. Diesa smirked back. The rogue got back on one knee and slowly, more cautiously this time, opened the lid all the way. There was a small cloth bag and a folded piece of paper at the bottom, and nothing else. Diesa read the note out loud. "The Dark Serpent beat you to it. Find me in Elnor's Slate District for more lucrative opportunities, if you've got the stuff. In the meantime, here's a little something for your trouble." Diesa emptied 6 gold pieces from the bag into her palm. "Yay, we're rich," Elora deadpanned. The dwarf inspected the interior of the box carefully, hoping to find a hidden compartment. When she found nothing, she stood up and kicked the box angrily. "Do not despair," Vorjon said calmly. "We will keep our word. You are welcome to come to Elnor with us, and there will likely be more opportunities to earn money for your family." Diesa said nothing and stomped angrily up the tunnel back toward the broken elevator. As they followed after the rogue, Salas asked, "Do you think she's still going to split the treasure with us?" Vorjon and Diesa climbed easily out of the deep pit, then used the ropes to pull the others up. They took advantage of the couple hours of daylight still left in the day and marched across the snow-mottled grasslands back toward the road to Elnor. The mine shaft was an hour behind them when Elora felt something brush against her feet. She jumped back and called out, "Snakes!" They stopped and looked at the ground. Snakes pushing 2 feet long darted between the grass and under the patches of snow. They sprung up near them, trying to take bites out of their feet and ankles. Salas was short enough that they were able to nip above her knees. One lunged at the gnome, but Vorjon slammed the edge of his shield down, decapitating it. He lifted Salas onto his shoulders before she could get bitten. It was impossible to count how many there were, and difficult to get a shot at one, even for Elora. From atop Vorjon's shoulders, Salas fired a salvo of magic missiles in the direction of a writhing cluster of the snakes. 5 of them perished immediately, and the rest scattered in different directions, disappearing into the grass and snow. They watched the ground all around them for a minute. The snakes did not return. Salas patted Vorjon on the head. "I think it's safe now." The Dragonborn put her down gently and said, "Strange that we find note from Serpent King and then get attacked by snakes." "Could be a coincidence too," Elora said. "Snakes are common in this kind of terrain." The ranger resumed leading them back to the road. They followed her for another hour. When the sun touched the horizon, they stopped and made camp for the night. The next morning began the coldest day of winter so far. The cold was magnified by the biting wind that whipped into them from the direction they needed to go. Silver-scaled dragonborns are not affected by the cold as much as other races, so Vorjon walked in front to help shield them from the wind. They followed behind each other closely, practically walking on each other's heels. Their progress was slow. They decided not to stop for lunch to make up for lost time, and walking helped keep them warm. By mid-afternoon, the wind strengthened into a gale. Even though Elora was right behind Vorjon, he still had to shout to be heard. "We should look for shelter!" Elora shouted back to him, "Already looking." A half hour later, she tapped him on the shoulder and pointed toward a distant rocky hill. "It looks like there's a cave there." Vorjon nodded and turned in that direction. When they got closer, they could see that there was indeed a small cave among some rocks at the foot of a small hill. The entrance was only about 4 feet tall, but if there was enough room inside it, it would be a welcome shelter from the icy wind. Salas summoned Pip. "Go check out the cave. Make sure it's safe." Pip huffed dramatically. "Fine, whatever." He lifted off the sorceress's shoulder and swooped into the opening. Seconds later, Salas's eyes widened. "Shit, he's gone!" Drusilla looked at her with concern. "Gone?" Salas confirmed. "Yeah, I think something killed him." "He's not really dead, though," Vorjon asked. "Can't you get him back with another scroll?" "Yeah," Salas said, "but right now I'm more worried about what's in there." They stared into the dark hole in the rocks and saw 3 pairs of eyes reflecting back at them. The eyes got larger as they got closer. Allura and Diesa readied their bows, and the others prepared to defend themselves. A wolf with pure white fur and piercing blue eyes appeared at the entrance to the cave. It was large enough it had to crouch down to get out. 2 other wolves waited behind the entrance. "Fuck," Allura shouted. "Winter wolves." Before she could fire an arrow, the wolf in front exhaled a cone of icy breath. It was similar to Vorjan's ice breath, but much more powerful. The freezing cold spray made the wind around them seem like a warm summer breeze by comparison. The sudden shock of cold knocked Drusilla, Salus, and Diesa unconscious. Allura was able to turn and brace for it. Cold permeated her body, and she felt like she'd never be warm again, but she remained conscious. She fired her arrow at the closest wolf and hit it in the chest below the neck. Vorjan's natural cold resistance protected him from the icy blast. He quickly ran to Drusilla and revived her with his healing touch. He stood in front of her and blocked the second wolf with his shield while swinging Eclipse upward into its ribs. He felt some crack upon impact. Drusilla rolled over and grabbed Salus's hand. She said a quick prayer of healing, and the gnome sat up, shivering uncontrollably, but alert. From her sitting position, she quickly fired off 5 magic missiles into the side of the winter wolf lunging at Allura. Vorjan used his shield to push his winter wolf into the path of the third to keep it from attacking his prone companions. Drusilla used the opportunity to scramble to her feet, run to Diesa, and heal her as well. The first wolf ignored the pain caused by Salus's attack and swiped at Allura. Its powerful claw dug into her thigh. Her leather armor took most of the damage, but the wolf's claws still ripped 3 large gashes into her flesh. She almost welcomed the feeling of warm blood running down her freezing skin into her boot. The ranger took 2 quick shots with her phoenix arrow. The first sailed past it, but the second hit the center of its head right above the muzzle and pierced its brain. The wolf's lifeless body toppled over into the snow. Diesa fired her short bow at the wolf engaged with Vorjan. It yipped and turned to charge her. Before it could, Vorjan once again swung his 2-headed mace into its rib cage. The blow collapsed the massive canine's lungs and stopped its heart. Drusilla, Salus, and Allura combined their attacks on the third wolf, which succumbed immediately. Allura limped over to Vorjan. The paladin fixed her injured leg with a healing prayer. Drusilla sent her magical light into the cavern to make sure there were no more wolves. They saw it was empty and just big enough to fit the 5 of them. They built a fire just inside the entrance so it could not be blown out by the wind. They huddled close to it to get as warm as they could. "We should skin those," Allura said as she warmed her hands. "Winter wolf pelts are rare and worth a lot." "In the morning," Drusilla answered. "They're not going anywhere." The brunch club fell asleep with Allura and Drusilla taking their turns at watch. Vorjan slept at the entrance to help block the wind from coming in. The next morning was calm and bright. Even though it was still chilly, the sun felt warm on their faces as they emerged from the wolf den. After a quick breakfast, they helped Allura skin the large winter wolves. Despite a few bloodstains and spots of singed fur, they managed to come away with some large, high-quality, snowy white pelts. It wasn't long before they were back on the relative safety of the road. They traveled quickly, and in the very early evening, they reached the gates of Elnor. This tale will continue next week in episode 20. Episode 19 was written by Dominic White and based upon a Dungeons & Dragons campaign created by our dungeon master, Brian Messmer. Valuable contributions to the story were added by the role-playing of Bethany Powers, who plays Diesa, J.P. Black, who plays Drusilla, Liz Richard, who plays Allura, Anna Flemke, who plays Salus, Dominic White, who plays Vorjan, and Brian Messmer, who plays everyone else. Ambience and effects used with permission by Michael Gelfi. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out by sharing it with your friends. We'd appreciate it. More information about Rescued by Dragons and ways to support this podcast can be found at rescuedbydragons.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Rescued by Dragons and on Twitter at Rescue Dragons. Thank you for listening, and please join us next week to find out, along with the rest of us, what happens next.